Hello, everyone. I'm Chris Goodwin with the Mississippi Department of Archives and History. Welcome to this week's History's Lunch program. We're in our home, the Craig H. Nielsen Auditorium in the Museum of Mississippi History and Mississippi Civil Rights Museum. And we're streaming live on both Facebook and YouTube, where these videos are available to watch anytime afterwards. And if you've not already done so, please silence your phones. In honor of the National Day of Racial Healing, the Foundation for the Mid-South is providing free admission to these museums tomorrow, February 1st. Then on Friday, February 2nd at 10 a.m., the Mississippi National Guard has organized a program in this auditorium commemorating 4 Mississippi chaplains who died during World War II. The men, a rabbi, a Catholic priest, a Methodist, and a Dutch Reformed minister, gave up their life vests to soldiers on the SS Dorchester as it sank. A reception will follow the ceremony, which is free and open to the public, so I hope we'll see you at that as well. Then on Saturday, February 3rd, we'll have an African-American genealogy workshop next door in the Winter Building, led by our friend and longtime MDAH archivist Joyce Dixon Lawson. You can register for that free program on the MDAH website. Our next Sunday screening will be on February 11th at 2 p.m., and we'll show the documentary Butterfly in the Sky, The Story of Reading Rainbow. It was an important program on PBS for a lot of folks, and the documentary is really fun. And then the 2024 Evers Lecture is set for Tuesday, February 13, and will feature Joyanne Reed, whose new book is Medgar and Merle, Medgar Evers and the Love Story That Awakened America. Finally, I hope you'll come back next week for History's Lunch, when Tim Buckner will join us to discuss his new book, The Barber of Natchez Reconsidered. Today, I am delighted to welcome Wesley Shoop to present Mississippi's Natural Heritage. Wesley L Shoop is former professor of parasitology at Murray State University, former director of parasitology at Merck & Company, and former vice president and global head of animal health at DuPont. He studied tropical medicine and parasitology at Louisiana State University and zoology at the University of Nebraska at Lincoln. Shoop has published over 100 scientific articles. His first book, Mississippi's Natural Heritage, Photographs of Flora and Fauna, was published in 2023 by University Press of Mississippi. Help me welcome Wesley Shoop.
Thank you, Chris. About 150 years ago, about 95% of the population of the United States lived in a rural setting. 5% lived in cities. In that short period of time, 150, 200 years, those percentages have completely reversed. What we have now are the majority of people living in cities. And when that unplanned societal migration took place, no one wrote a memo to say move. It just happened. And when that occurred, though, there was a disconnect that also occurred. And people became estranged from nature when that occurred. And I wrote this book to help reunite us with nature, to reintroduce us with nature. In the book is about 400 species, 400 photographs of organisms that you will find throughout the state. They were all taken in LeFleur's Bluff State Park. That was done for a reason. The main reason I wanted to get across on that was that you could go anywhere in the state. You didn't have to try to traverse the state itself. You could go to any place, whether it's LeFleur's Bluff, a local ravine, or even your backyard. We've become so estranged and disconnected from nature, we don't know the birds in our backyard anymore. We travel in a car, we roll up the windows, turn on the AC, go to a similar type of situation in our work environment, and then reverse it when we come home in the evening, and we know very little about what is going on around us. And I wanted to, as I said, reintroduce us back into what we have around us. In my own yard, I've identified about 750 species of organisms in my own yard. My yard is not remarkable whatsoever. It's in a subdivision just a few miles from here. My suspicion is my backyard is no different than yours. Could you name 750 species in your yard? I doubt it. I doubt it. Most people now get their nature from a nature show on PBS. They may every now and then go to a local state park. Once in a lifetime, you may book a trip to the Amazon or to Borneo. But we're really estranged from it. And I thought it would be a good idea if we made a new reintroduction on it. And so in this book, there are 400 species. And you might ask, well, what is 400 species? If you went on iNaturalist, which is a beautiful website for biologists, and you took a look on that, it has a list of all the people, and there's about 10,000 here in Mississippi alone that contribute to it, 10,000. And it has the entire list on it. And the highest ones that have identified species here are right at 2,000. That's a lot. And if it will list them in order. And if you take a look at that list, and you go all the way down and you ask, if I just took this book and recognized and understood the 400 species that are in it, where would I fall on that particular list? You would fall in the 99.9 category if you just knew the 400 from that book. Now, I hope you know a lot more, but it's a heck of a good start. And 400 species is not nothing. And as I said, you can find them anywhere in the state. And I wanted to kind of prove that by showing and photographing just the ones that are in LeFleur's. Now, I have identified quite a few more that are outside of LeFleur's throughout the state, but chose not to include those in the book. Again, to make the point, you can go anywhere and do what is in this book. And that is the primary point of what we have done. Now, if this will advance, I can't go through all 400 species that are in the book, or the 1,000 or so that I have photographed myself, or the thousands of others who I don't have photographs of. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick a handful, and rather than whip through and show hundreds of other photographs, I'm going to try to tell you a little bit about these. And I did not choose exotic examples. I wanted to choose examples that you could find in your yard or close to it, or in a local state park. And so I've chosen about a dozen that we will go through, and I will say something a little bit about on each and every one of them. The first one I've chosen here, you might recognize, again, not an exotic organism at all. It's a monarch butterfly. This one happens to be nectaring on a blue mist flower. These are found throughout the state twice a year, usually around June and then later in the year. What is interesting about these, there's several things that I'm going to bring your attention to. This is a fragile little creature that you see in your yard. If you've got flowers, you might see them around. You may or may not pay any attention to them. If they do catch your eye, it's simply for their beauty. They've got remarkably beautiful colors of yellows, oranges, and whatnot. And you might ask the question, why does a fragile organism like this have such bright, beautiful colors? They're bright and beautiful. It got your attention. Does it get the attention of predators too? Well, yes, it does, but not in the way you might think. This organism is bright and beautiful because it's telling you something. It's telling you, I'm bright and beautiful. Do not touch. I am poisonous. Now, these creatures, when you look at them, you might go, how did that thing get poisonous? Well, that thing didn't get poisonous. It was the caterpillar stage that became poisonous. The caterpillars of the monarch butterfly feed almost exclusively on a type of plant called milkweeds. Milkweeds are toxic. They're toxic, as a lot of plants are. And the reason for that is they don't want to be eaten. Now, they have fruits that are usually lush and plush and brightly colored and sugary and tasteful. They want you to eat their fruits. They want you to disperse their seeds. But they themselves do not want to be eaten. It doesn't work in evolution very well. And so they have evolved all sorts of different molecules to keep predators from eating them. Well, the monarch caterpillar has evolved ways to avoid those. And when it feeds on the milkweeds, it not only internalizes those toxins, but it has found ways to sequester them and keep them for their own purposes. They don't just digest them for nutrients, they keep them for their own protection. And so birds will not eat a monarch caterpillar. What is interesting is when the monarch metamorphoses to a chrysalis and then on to the adult that you see here, those same toxins are maintained. And they're actually transported and now occur out in the wings. And that is why they're beautiful organisms, because they're sending you a message, even in your own garden, in your backyard. But that's not the real cool part of a monarch. That's just a part of the monarch. Did you know that this monarch, of all the thousands of millions of species of insects, has the greatest migration of any insect in the world? And it occurs right here in Mississippi. And to look at it and understand the migration is truly phenomenal. All monarchs in winter right now are down in one particular place, right down here in central Mexico. I've been told those that are watching this on TV and whatnot cannot see the pointer, but nonetheless, down here in the middle part of Mexico, you have the wintering population. Pretty soon, that population will begin to migrate northwards, and it will get to the southern part of Texas before it runs out of gas, and they grow old, they reproduce, they go through the egg, caterpillar, chrysalis stage, and then a new generation will then start moving up, and that's where we see it then in Mississippi as it moves through this second generation. So we see it somewhere around June. And when you see it in around June, it's heading northward. And it's actually the children of the one that started here in Mexico. And as that generation runs out of gas, it spawns a third generation that moves up into the upper third of the northeastern part of the United States and Canada until it too runs out of gas. And then a fourth generation is spawned at that time. And the reason it runs out of gas is twofold. Number one, that actually happens to be the northern, oops, wrong slide. It actually happens to be the northern part of the milkweed range. There's no place for the caterpillars to feed north of there. So it runs out of the type of feed that the caterpillar needs, but it also runs out of time. A lot of ectothermic organisms like the monarch have to rely on day length to know when to hibernate. And towards the end of the fall, day length, as you know, starts getting shorter. And when that starts to occur, the monarchs turn around and head back south. It's as simple as that. When the day lengths are growing longer, they move northward. When the day lengths end and start going in the reverse, they head back south. It's in simple terms, that's about as easy as it gets. But it's that migration back 3,000 miles all the way back, that one generation, that's where we see them for the second time later in fall. It's an extraordinary migration, greater than any wildebeest in the Serengeti ever undertakes. The insects are the largest group of organisms on the planet. When Robert May, the great theoretical biologist, was asked to describe life on the planet in one word, he said simply, insect. They're the largest taxon by far. Millions of species have been identified, and probably a million more will. So when you say the monarch has the longest and most entailed migration of any insect, you're saying something. And we get to see it here in Mississippi twice a year. And what is extraordinary to me is this generation here starts out for a place that it will never reach. And this generation up here starts to return to a place it has never been. And when you think about it, it's really extraordinary the amount of information that you can have in your DNA that allows you to carry out such a complicated, interesting migration. And again, this occurs in your backyard twice a year here in Mississippi, and most people pay no attention to it whatsoever. One of the greatest migrations of all time. Now let me transition over to another organism that you probably do not know. It is a drab organism. I've never met anybody that actually knew what this was that I hadn't told. It's called a gemmed satyr. It is a drab-looking butterfly that occurs all over Mississippi. You can find them in the summer months all throughout LeFleur's Bluff State Park and probably also in your backyard. It never flies above the height of your knee. It usually is in a wooded area, and because it's drab, you pay no attention to it. If you were to pay attention to this gemmed satyr, what you will notice is out on the back hind wing. Oops, I've done it again with the slides. If you look right there, that is a jumping spider that has been tattooed onto the hind wing. Why on earth would a butterfly tattoo a jumping spider onto its hind wing? Well, first of all, it's distal to the anterior end here, the head, the business end of the butterfly. And there are two things that this does. To a micropredator, it probably is intimidating because a jumping spider is a very, very predatory little organism for its size. For larger organisms, such as birds and whatnot, it's not going to intimidate them, but it attracts targeting away from the head and towards an area of the hind wing that it can lose. And in the latter part of the year, when I photograph these organisms, it's usually this area that has been pecked off and is gone. And when you look at our Google gemmed satyr, you'll find several reports of them. Not very much is known about them, but they get their name from gemmed because people think that these are gems, onyx gems, and that these are the glare off of those beautiful gems. They're wrong. These are eye spots. They're not gems whatsoever. And when you think about it as from a biological perspective, and also mainly in this case from a photographic perspective, as a photographer, when I photograph either people or wildlife, one of the things that you're always looking for is their eye, the catch light in their eye. You may not know what a catch light is, but it's the glare that comes off of the cornea. It gives the eye life. You don't want to ever take a picture of a person and not capture the catch light. Same is true in wildlife. You could have a beautiful picture of a Mississippi kite, and if you don't capture the catch light, you might as well throw it away. That's why sharks give you the heebie-jeebies. They don't have a catch light. Their eyes look dead. So this particular organism, the gemmed satyr, has captured the jumping spider. Now, many of you probably don't know what a jumping spider is, but you have those probably in your house and throughout your yard. And here I've taken that very picture that I've taken, put it up on the top, and another picture of a jumping spider down below. And one of the things about jumping spiders, they're in the family Salticity, and they've got a unique set of eyes. Their front eyes are large, and then they've got a secondary type, and then they've got some smaller ones that you can't even see in this particular slide. They're down the sides. The reason they have them up front and they're large is because these organisms, as their name suggests, jump. They jump out into a void. And if you want to jump out into a void, you've got to stick the landing. And in order to do that, you've got binocular eyes up front. They have crossover, and it gives you depth perception. And so in the salticity of which jumping spiders are found, they have this unique pattern of eyes here that is found in no other spider group. And you see it up here. And you also see that this gemmed satyr is bloody serious about making this tattoo look real, because it's got even counter shading around it to give it depth. Humans didn't discover counter shading until the 14th and 15th century in painting, where they transitioned from planar views that would just look flat to counter shading involved, which made them look real and gave them depth. Well, this organism is serious about it, and it's got counter shading giving rise to all of the legs, 8 of them if you actually look at it very closely, and then it gives the whole body depth. But it's those eyes that are the tell. That's the giveaway that betray what they're really about. Those are the catch lights of the eye, just as you see down here in a true jumping spider. And again, this is an evolutionary event. It occurs throughout Mississippi, and almost no one knows anything about it. Now you do. Another one that I find very interesting here is the Io moth. It's spelled I-O. And it is a nondescript moth, and as most moths are, it's nocturnal. And it hides up in trees, and you likely may have never seen one, but they're all over Mississippi. This particular moth I saw, and I walked up to her. It's a female, gorgeous. She is beautifully chestnut colored, almost velvet in appearance, and it's a fairly large moth. We're not talking about a little thing here. She's about this size, good size. And when you walk up to her, she's got a surprise for you. She will, if you disturb her, will raise those 4 wings up, and she'll give you a good looking over. Again, it's to intimidate you. Not you, but other predators that might prey on her. The Io moth, whenever I see one, it kind of, they're beautiful, but they kind of make me sad because I know that when they come out of the chrysalis, they have but days, if not a week, to live. They don't even have mouth parts that work. They're not designed to even feed at that stage. All they are to do is to find a mate, and then lay eggs. And so when you find one, they don't have much time. They don't have much in the way of defenses. This is about it. And they work very well. And again, what you see in this are eye spots for sure. You also see the catchlight as well. This little female she wants to intimidate you completely. You might wonder what other nocturnal organisms that she might be trying to intimidate or to mimic. And owls would be one that might come to mind. Again, those big, white, wide pupils with a catchlight, and she's trying to make other would-be predators to think that they just encountered an owl rather than a simple, very fat little female that would be a juicy morsel if you understood otherwise. Let me transition to other organisms that you might find around. Every time I go to LeFleur's Bluff, I may or may not see a Mississippi kite. I may or may not see a red-shouldered hawk, but I can always count on finding fossils. And in this case, solitary corals. What are solitary corals doing in central Mississippi? Well, you probably know that the entire part of Mississippi from basically a line from Meridian up to Memphis and south was underwater. About 200 feet of water about 70 million years ago. And you also probably know that there is a volcano sitting right under us right now. And it exploded about 66 million years ago and created an island about 180 square miles called Jackson Island. And all around it were marine organisms, including corals. Now, the uplift of that volcanic explosion, which probably went up close to 10,000 feet, or it probably is less than that, but that's what the terrain below suggests. Not only has that been truncated and gone down, but obviously the seas have receded and gone back to where we know them now in the Gulf. But at one time, these type of organisms existed. Flabellum on the right and Balanophilium on the right of you. And you can find these dispersed on the ground as as the bluff, LeFleur's Bluff erodes, and that mountain that was created by the volcano, as it further erodes in the rain, these structures wash out. I know this is history is lunch, but you're usually probably not dealing with history that's 38 million years, and this is what these are. And they're extraordinary finds, and like I said, I can count on finding these in LeFleur's Bluff almost every time I go. If you want to know what they looked like when they were alive, this is it. I'm a diver, and so I have encountered these out in marine waters on numerous occasions. And you can see Flabellum on your left and Balanophilia on your right, what they actually look like. They're solitary corals. But they're extraordinary things, and when you find them again, they're really cool to see. Now, most of you probably don't have bluffs in your backyard. that would expose these things. But I can pretty much assure you they're under your house. They're under us right now. This building is probably built on thousands of these underneath us, and they occur. And the question is, did you know it? Another organism that I wanted to put in the slide deck was one that you clearly have seen. You know it well. It's in your gardens. It's on your house. It's a green anole. It's a lizard. And you probably pay little attention to it. It's a green anole. You go on and about your business and pay no attention whatsoever to it. Well, it's got 2 ears, as you can see here. One on the other side, which you can't. The same with the nostrils. It's got 2 forelimbs, 2 hind limbs, and 3 eyes. Did you know that? 3 eyes in this creature. If you take a look at it, if the slide advances, what you will see is there is the normal eye, one on the other side hidden, but there is a 3rd eye in the middle of its head, right there. It's an eye. And one might wonder, what is a 3rd eye doing in the head of a lizard? Well, first of all, let me convince you that it is indeed an eye. This is a cross-section done well over 100 years ago, I think in 1886, by a gentleman, a British man named Spencer. He serially sectioned that eye. And what you find there is it is indeed an eye. These are the scales on either side. This is the eye right here. It's got an epithelial top to it, a cornea, and then it's got a lens here, right here, that actually takes the light and focuses it back on a retina right here. This retina is composed of photocells. Those cells are very elongate. They dive down through a blind spot right here into an optic nerve that goes right to the brain. It's an eye. Now, whether it focuses an image or not is probably, well, we don't know, but it probably doesn't. But what it does do is exactly what I was saying about the monarch. It's an ectothermic organism. It gets its heat from the outside, from the environment. And it's got to then be able to register how that environment is acting. And it does that by day length. And by that, it needs to understand circadian rhythms to know when it's time to come out of hibernation, when it's time to mate, when it's time to go back into hibernation. You don't want to mate and lay eggs in the middle of winter. It doesn't work real well. And so these organisms have the ability to tell when the daylight is telling it it's time to mate and lay eggs, when it's time to close up shop and go back down into the earth and wait out the winter. And again, it's an organism you see every day. Did you know it had 3 eyes? It's pretty actually interesting when you think about it. Here's a gem that is in Mississippi that is, I think, one of our best kept secrets. It's the ringed Sawback turtle. It is an extraordinary jewel found in Mississippi and almost exclusively in Mississippi. It is found only in the Pearl River drainage and nowhere else in the world. When I was a graduate student, I was offered by a Chinese collector over $1,000 to get him one sample to finish out his collection on these turtles. I refused to do it, would today as well. But it's an extraordinarily beautiful turtle, and it's ours. And most people don't know anything about it. But you can walk down to LeFleur's Bluff on any sunny day, peer over into the Pearl, and find these turtles basking. And it's a family of map turtles that is found almost exclusively in the southeast and largely in Mississippi. And it's something we should be very proud of, but very few of us know anything about it. Let's stay in reptiles for a second. As all of you know, we've got alligators in the state. Did you know the alligator was named after Mississippi? The scientific name is Alligator mississippiensis. Mississippiensis is Latin for in Mississippi. Most of you probably know they're ectotherms too. They get their heat from the outside. And most people think of ectotherms as not taking care of their young. Most people think they have no maternal care whatsoever. That is true of most lizards and most snakes. It is not true of the crocodilians, of which our example here is Alligator mississippiensis. In fact, the mother is a very, very careful mother. She not only lays her eggs in a nest and then stays and protects the nest, but when the hatchlings hatch, she stays and takes care of them as well. And if you don't believe so, go pet her and find out what happens. In this particular case, you can see the little babe up on top of her head. There was about another half a dozen down her body. As soon as they saw me, I didn't see them. They started chirping, and they were calling their mom, and mom surfaced immediately. And then they went to her, and they sat there and dared me. They allowed me a picture, but they dared me to go any further. But at any rate, alligators have substantial maternal care, and it's really a delight to see them out in the wild taking care of their young. This is one of my favorite photos that I've ever taken. This is down in LeFleur's again. In fact, I should quit saying that. All of the photos that I'm showing here are from LeFleur's Bluff. Let's just end it there. This one was taken across Mae Lake. It's one of the most beautiful things I think I've ever seen. I've been to the Serengeti, I've been to the Amazon, I've been to many places, but none of them rival what occurs on Mae Lake in the late summer. If you you go there in the late summer, late in the evening, when most people go home around dusk, a funny thing starts to happen. Wading birds by the hundreds start descending on Mae Lake. They come out of the sky. There are cattle egrets, snowy egrets, great egrets, little blue herons, roseate spoonbills, Anhingas, cormorants, wood storks, and they descend on a certain series of trees on the back of Lake Mays. And it's an extraordinary phenomenon to see. This shot was over 200 yards out. It was not an easy shot to get. It was in the dusk. And if you know anything about photography, light is very important, and there isn't much of it at dusk. But this was a beautiful scene that occurs there, like I said, during summertime in the late evening, almost daily on most years. And you can take a look and see if you can identify the different species in there. They're all there. Birds. I'm not going to go into a lot of the birds, but this is a red-shouldered hawk. It is the king of the day out at LeFleur's for the most part. And we have those that are the kings of the night. This is a barred owl, Strix varia. You can go down there for the last couple years in the parking lot of LeFleur's Bluff and oftentimes see them raising their young. For the last couple years in the parking lot, the young are found in the trees there. And they oftentimes come down to the ground, and it's an amazing thing to see. A lot of people were worried in the beginning, what are these young birds doing on the ground, thinking that they needed help. And the ranger there took great care to try to build an artificial nest and kept crawling up 20 or so feet to put them back in, only to find out later it's a natural part of their behavior. They come down to the ground, and then just like a parrot, they crawl back up the tree with they use both their talons and their beak as they move up. It's really startling to see. And that occurs down there all the time. It probably also occurs in your yards. We have them all the time in our backyard. They've got the characteristic "who cooks for you" all type of call to it. Let's see if this will advance. Another bird is the king of the water. This is an Anhinga. Anhingas are one of my favorite birds. It's not to a lot of people, but it is to me. Anhingas and cormorants don't have a lot of oil glands. When you watch a duck or whatnot preening, they float on the water very easily because the oil glands basically coat their feathers. It makes them waterproof. Not so the Anhinga, because it is a pursuit diver. It goes after its food underwater, and it uses that spear-like bill to do exactly that, spear its prey, which are fish. And you see it oftentimes in this particular profile out of water because it's having to dry its wings. Because when it comes out, those wings are waterlogged. And if you were to try to approach it, it would struggle trying to get away from you. And if you ever see one in this kind of this formation, it's trying to dry those wings. And what is really cool about this bird is if you see it in the water, because the wings or the feathers are not coated with oil, the bird struggles staying on the surface. And what more often not you see is this. And it gets its common name, snake bird, because it can't float. And when you see it in the water, it is typically like this. The body, of course, is under the water, and the head is moving in this very sinuous fashion across. And it scares people when they see it. And it's just simply an Anhinga that can't float. Another bird that is a Mississippi jewel is the prothonotary warbler. This is one that is not a year-long resident here at all. In fact, right now, they are all down in Colombia, South America. But just in a month or two, they will start a migration all the way from Colombia, South America, up to the southeastern part of the United States. And we see them throughout Mississippi, but not really throughout Mississippi. You find them mainly in wetlands. It's a gorgeous bird, weighs less than an ounce. It's just remarkably beautiful, and it's hard to miss them if you go down to the park anytime during the summer. They're calling continuously. And to think that a bird that is no more than an ounce could make a migration from Colombia, South America here, largely over the Gulf of Mexico, is truly astounding to think about it. But they not only do it once a year, they do it twice a year. Because once they get here, they mate, they lay their eggs, they then bring up their brood, and towards the latter part of the year, in summer, they start to get ready to make that migration a second time back home. One of the startling things about this that I found out was, do you have any idea? First of all, let me preface what I'm going to say by this is an insectivore. They pretty much feed on insects alone, and they love caterpillars. And do you have any idea how many caterpillars it takes while they're here to raise 4 young over the course of just a couple of 3 weeks? 6,000. And it's an extraordinary number. So when you see these little birds in LeFleur's calling and whatnot, they are busy as can be. They are on a knife's edge of survival. To bring in 6,000 caterpillars in a matter of a couple of weeks is extraordinary. But that's what it takes to get their young to a point that they could actually ever be allowed to move or fly back to a place like Colombia, South America. Just a hummingbird. This was one of my earlier shots, and hence one of my favorites. When I first saw this trumpet vine, I was trying to photograph a trumpet vine. I saw this green thing hanging out the back. For the moment, it took me a while to realize what I was looking at. But it was a hummingbird that had, and at times he actually almost immersed himself into this trumpet vine. And it was only later when he popped back out that you could tell what he actually was. And again, when you just are out and you see things, and this occurs, of course, in your yard as well. I'm sure most of you who ever put out feeders and whatnot would know this little organism. Let's switch over and just talk about photography a little bit. This is a yellow-crowned night heron, a beautiful bird. And most of my shots, if you take a look at them in the book or whatnot, I include both the organism and its environment. I'm a biologist first, and a photographer deeply second. But as a photographer, I also know that when there's nothing around the animal to bring out and want to talk to you about, then just take the damn picture. and the picture can be actually pleasurable to look at. And in this case, you can use your f-stop and stop down the image to control depth of field. And you can blur out the back. Photographers call it a bokeh. And in this case, that's what I did. And you get an image that really just draws your eye to the subject itself and to nothing else. Well, there wasn't anything else to see anyway. At any rate, just from a photographer standpoint, you can use different settings on your camera to achieve different aims. I did the same thing on a cedar waxwing. I'm not going to tell you anything about their biology. There are interesting things, but these are interesting things on how you do photography. You can wipe out everything else. You don't have to do it mysteriously with AI or any other technique. You can just change the f-stop on your camera and accomplish a similar thing. I will say something about this particular bird. It's a magnificent bird. In fact, it's a magnificent frigate bird. They don't usually occur up here in central Mississippi, let alone LeFleur's Bluff, and may have even flown over your house. They are usually found down in the Gulf, in the Mississippi Sound, because it's an oceanic bird. It's a big bird, 7 to 8 feet wingspan. Now, I'm 6'5", and usually your arms go about the same size. It goes beyond this. And when I was out there, and I shouldn't have been out there because I think it was Hurricane Ida that was coming through that day, and that's why it was there. It had flown in advance of the hurricane to escape it. And they were flying just 15 feet over my head, and it was just after I'd gotten out of my car. These things were flying above me, and they're very ancient-looking organism. And to have them at that length, I couldn't even take the photograph of them. They were that close. I had to wait till they moved out and backed up to even get one in the frame. They were that close. No one had ever seen these before except Steve Peterson, who had seen one just earlier in the day, but he hadn't gotten a good photograph of it, and I did. It's the only time that these particular birds were found in LeFleur's Bluff. It's an extraordinary bird, and we had it right there, at least momentarily, before Ida went away, and the bird, no doubt, flew within a few hours back to its regular site. I'm not going to say a lot about mammals. We don't have very many aquatic mammals here in Mississippi, but the otter is one, a glorious little creature. This one was about 4 feet long. I came across it in the middle of winter, and he came out of the water looking at me like he wanted his picture taken, so I obliged. I actually, on this one, I had to back up as well because he was so close. And to watch an otter swim is just absolutely remarkable. It's a torpedo in the water. And this little guy, after he got through looking at me, went off and just started swimming in Mae Lake. And what a delight to see. But we have a healthy population in Mississippi, and occasionally we see them in LeFleur's Bluff. But it's a very rare animal to see. And if you get to see one, you're quite lucky. This little creature followed me, actually. He didn't know it at the time, but he was paralleling the path with me as I was walking through. It was a young of the year, and he was just chattering away. He didn't know I was there, and I actually ended up clapping my hands just to make sure he got away, and he jumped behind a tree, and every now and then he'd stick his little head out and look at me just to find out who made that terrible noise. At any rate, after watching him for a few minutes, I heard chattering coming up behind me. It was his mom. And she came and got Junior and got him by the ear and drug him off back into the woods again, chattering all the way. Again, you know this as the common raccoon. There's life all around us, but there's death too. This one happens to be an opossum. Opossums people pay no attention to, don't care much about them. That's amazing. The opossum is actually more closely related to kangaroos than it is to any of our placental mammals. In fact, if you ever took the time on a female and turned her over, she has a pouch. She has a pouch with 13 teats in it. And she can almost have that many offspring. We call them joeys, just like you would in Australia if you found a kangaroo. They are basically arboreal kangaroos. And we have them here in this state. And again, you have them in your backyard. You may even have one in your garage. We do. and they're extraordinary creatures. You might look at this one and go, what is going on with those fangs? Opossums are insectivores, scavengers. What do they need fangs like that for? Well, they don't use them for capturing prey. These are found, they're sexually selected in the males, and they use them to fight other males for mating rights. It's not for attacking you or anything else. In fact, I commonly, when I find possums, will actually pick them up, and they're really quite docile. I wouldn't advise it, because the one you get may be different. If they had these fangs, they wouldn't use them. Oh, by the way, that was a question mark butterfly down there that was actually puddling on the minerals that were coming out of the mandibles of that dead opossum. I'm getting late in the talk here. The Indian pink is a beautiful flower, as many of you know. I show it here because it's like a lot of plants. They have all sorts of molecules inside of them for defense. And when I used to work at Merck and Company and others, we used to go out and all over the world and bring back plants, animals from the oceans and whatnot, and study them and find out what actual molecules they had. Mother Nature is the best chemist. We used to hire chemists from Yale and Harvard and whatnot, paid them fortunes, lined their pockets with gold, but they couldn't outdo Mother Nature. Mother Nature has had 4.5 billion years of fighting out in the soil. She doesn't fight with gloves. She doesn't fight with hand grenades. She fights with chemicals. And she's evolved chemicals throughout that period of time. And if you can piggyback onto those, you can find some things that no Harvard chemist would ever have dreamed of. And that's what we did. And we found some of those and made billions. For instance, we were talking earlier about ivermectin. Ivermectin is what you may use if you've got a dog to kill heartworm. It's the active ingredient in almost all heartworm products. We found that. It was a product that we found on a golf course in Kitasato, Japan, from an organism living in the soil. And so you can find all sorts of different things. And the Indian pink, when you look at it, you can marvel at its beauty, but it also has what we call anthelmintic properties. It's got molecules in it that will keep other things from eating it. And that was the story I wanted to tell about Indian pink. I'm going to forgo this one because I see my time is getting nigh. But this one is an interesting, and again, I don't want to show just exotic organisms and go, wow, this is a clover. This is a white clover. They're all over the ground. You stomp on them. You don't think twice about them. You mow them. You may even spray Roundup on them. If you ever took the time to pick one up and look on the inside of it, they're absolutely gorgeous. It's not a single flower. It's a series of a dozen or two, maybe more florets. And when you look into the internal part of it, the geometric patterns of it remind me of the old kaleidoscopes that they used to have that you would turn around as a child. They're truly remarkable, and yet we pay no attention to them. And if we do, it's usually as an attempt to kill them. Frost flowers, not a flower at all. But you see it here in Mississippi, usually a couple days out of the year, usually in the fall when a frost comes. It's not a flower at all, but it occurs on a flower. It's an interesting phenomenon where in those early days of fall, the air temperature drops below freezing, but the ground is still above freezing. And the plant doesn't know it's dead yet or that it will be dead. And water transferred up the xylem is coming up out of the soil. And as soon as it gets into the axis of the plant that is above ground, it meets that very cold, frigid air. And that those water molecules then do what water molecules do when they become frozen. They expand. The hydrogen bonds push them out. And when that happens, it ruptures the actual xylem tubes of the plant. And depending on the way the rupture occurs, you can get these gossamer ribbons that flow out. They're absolutely paper-thin crystals that are moving out and form, every one, just like a snowflake, a unique pattern that has probably never occurred before and never will occur again. And it lasts for just a few hours in the morning again in the late fall on just a couple of days here in Mississippi. But if you ever come across them out in the field or in your yard, you will know what's happening. And it is a beautiful thing. And as soon as the sun comes up above the trees, the light rays, whether the air temperature, it stays freezing, but as soon as the photons hit it, it's enough energy that these crystalline structures just evaporate before your eyes and are not ever seen again. I'm going to basically kind of end on this particular organism. It's a lichen. You no doubt have these on your trees in your yard. They're found throughout Mississippi. You may even know that it's not really an individual organism. It's actually composed of two organisms. One is an alga, which is a plant. The other one is a fungus. Algae and plants are from two totally different kingdoms in biology. And what in biology we oftentimes think of in evolution, if you look at a phylogenetic tree, is a number of branches. And usually you have bifurcations as an ancestral species gives rise to daughter species. And the tree is just filled with these types of bifurcating branches. That's what makes the tree. But very few people realize that sometimes another very extraordinary event occurs. And that is, bifurcations are there, and they are probably the great majority of them. But there are some that don't do this, they do this. And if you looked at a phylogenetic tree and you see the kingdom Plantae going up with all sorts of vascular plants and some algae and whatnot in them, all that photosynthesize, and then you've got over on the other side of the tree, the fungal group, which are really saprobes, they have come together and they have married. And these species have come together and formed a group that shares a similar evolutionary fate. They cannot, in many of these cases, the one cannot live without the other. So if one dies, the other one dies too. That is a marriage. And it produces new species. And that occurs anytime you look out on your trees. A very rare event is occurring in nature. That type is completely different than what you usually think of in a phylogenetic tree. It is things coming together. And this is not, as you might guess, an extraordinarily rare event. As I've said in previous lectures on these topics, is if you want to see another one that is not a lichen, just look at the person next to you. You're also a case of this type of reticulate evolution. I was always intrigued when I was a graduate student. I worked with the electron microscope, which is nothing but a big camera, by the way. And I remember I sectioned a piece of my own skin one time, and I took a look on the inside of the cells, and there's an organelle called a mitochondrion. The mitochondrion is called the power pack of the cell. It produces ATP, adenosine triphosphate. It's the energy that makes you work. If you didn't have mitochondria, you would literally be dead before you hit the floor. They're that important to you. And the intriguing thing about the mitochondrion is it has a double membrane around it. A more intriguing thing about the mitochondrion is it has circular DNA in it. What are circular DNA doing in an organelle inside your cells? If there's nothing else sacred about you, it should be the internal part of your cells. What is this thing doing in there? The nuclear DNA over there is you. Those are your 46 chromosomes. 23 you got from your mom, 23 you got from your dad. But out in the cytoplasm are all these little organelles that have their own DNA. Well, the short answer to the story, we now know, is that these are actually bacteria. That 2 billion years ago, when we were single cells, our ancestors ingested another cell, a bacterium. And when they ingested it, they pinched it off, and it formed a double membrane around it. Now, most of those cells that they ingested, they did so to eat and get nutrition from. But some of them survive, just like hookworms, tapeworms, and other trematodes live inside you. You ingested them, you ate them, but they're just trying to survive. That's what occurred there. Guess what bacteria have? circular DNA. It's not found anywhere else. It's only found in bacteria. Mitochondria are not you. The very thing that keeps you alive is not you. You too have formed a marriage with another group of organisms that keep you alive. And so when you look at a lichen, think about yourself. You're doing the same thing. You're trying to survive, and you've made an evolutionary deal with another organism to do that. One does something the other one can't, and the other one does something that you can't. And together, you can do it together and survive. And it's been one of the great deals in evolutionary biology. It is what gave rise to eukaryote-type organisms, which most of us are. And without that, we would not exist. And at any rate, next time you look at a lichen, you might just think about those typical things. But my time is waning. Again, I can't show you the thousands of photos, but I've shown you a few, and I hope you've appreciated it. At any rate, thank you very much.
We have a few minutes for questions. If anyone has one, you can raise your hand. I'll bring the microphone to you.
I've spent a lot of time down at Mae Lake, and I've never seen a roseate spoonbill. When do you see those birds?
You see them in kind of late summer. They're kind of sporadic. You can't just count on them. It's one of those things that, when they are there, they usually stay there for a few days or a few weeks, and you might have to move around to different parts of water bodies in the park to see them. But to give you a date and time to see them is not possible. But they are there. They're usually there almost every year, but a precise time I could not give you.
What species of bats can be found in Mississippi?
Oh, my word. There's quite a few numbers of bats. Some of the guys that are here that work on the prothonotary project and check the nest boxes in spring, oftentimes, not often, but occasionally find bats in them. You can also go down to Mae Lake during the summertime or whatnot, and just sit out in a lawn chair and look across the lake and see bats just swooping down. I watch them all the time in my backyard too. How many species there are, Libby, do you know by any chance?
Yeah, they're less than 20.
Yeah, there's a dozen to almost 24 species here. And remarkable, again, nocturnal creatures that we know very little about. They come out just like the owl does at nighttime, about the time we go to bed. But they are here. They're insectivorous and beautiful little creatures that it's called convergent evolution. Most mammals do not fly. Bats have found a way to do it. They use the same humerus and a radius and ulna that we do. They simply have an epithelial band in there that allows them to take advantage of air and lift, and fantastic little creatures. Yes, ma'am.
I held a hummingbird nest in my hand
Right now?
in Mississippi.
Oh, okay.
On my son's farm.
Mm-hmm.
It blew out of a tree.
Mm-hmm.
I held it in my hand. That's most unusual, isn't it?
Well, it is and it isn't. I mean, obviously hummingbirds exist, and obviously a hummingbird came from a nest. So whenever you have or see a hummingbird, there was, at least in the past, a nest that it came from. But they are tiny. They are incredibly well camouflaged, and they're ephemeral. They don't last forever. But no, they do occur, and I mean, when you see one, it's an extraordinary thing. It's not easily seen. They're really quite, like you said, quite tiny, as you would guess from a hummingbird.
Well, that nest, if I save that nest, can I save that nest?
Well, yeah, of course you can. Of course you can. Now, the hummingbird isn't going to come back to it, but no, you can certainly save the nest and put it on display or something. And I mean, if the hummingbird has already used it and the young have fledged, then it's history. And especially if it blew out of the tree as you described. So no issues there.
We've gotten to the top of another hour, but before we close, will you say a few words about the project that you're doing with the museum trail?
Oh, certainly. With Ray Nielsen and his group of colleagues, as you know, they are putting together a museum trail, and they have really worked quite hard to do it, to make it available to everyone. And it connects a number of the Mississippi museums, and it's not done. They have plans to extend it out over Lakeland and around, and it's going to be quite an extraordinary thing well, it's an extraordinary thing now, and it will be even more extraordinary as it reaches its final form. But they have done it to unite Jackson, the museum specifically, and give people a chance to get out, to walk, to see nature, to commune with one another, and I support it in any way I can, and I've done so with some of my photographs that they now use on their site, and will continue to do so in the future, but it is a program that is worthwhile supporting.
The book is beautiful, and we have copies of it for sale over here. If you didn't get a chance to ask a question, I bet Wesley would be glad to answer it over here. We've got a lot going on. Pick up a copy of the schedule. Come to as many of the events as you can make. Come back next week when we'll hear a talk on the Barber of Natchez Reconsidered. For now, let me thank Wesley Shoop for this fantastic program today.